DeGuerin. We have Mr. Millius, Mr. Miata, Mr. Anderson, and Mr. Balian. Mr. Balian, you may resume the people's opening argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Millius. So, Mr. Millius was too bashful to tell you, so I'm going to tell you. He drew all those drawings, all those illustrations that were on there, and he drew them out of his own imagination. And they supported a story that was supported only by those drawings, not by anything else. And just like Mr. Millius drew those drawings from his own imagination, Mr. Durst's testimony came straight from his imagination. Now, I'd like to tell you I drew this book, but I was told that I should probably tell you, because I've been made fun of repeatedly, that I was trying to tell you to make sure you knew that wasn't a real book. And I was told that you guys are probably smart enough to realize that wasn't a real book, so in case anyone's not sure, you can't go on the Kindle or Amazon and buy that book, How to Get Away with Murder. I don't think anyone's confused about that, but I was told I should let you know. But it's very clear from Mr. Millius' presentation that after the Galveston trial, Mr. Durst, the defendant in this case, pulled out his book on how to get away with murder. He opened it up and he added another entry. Watch, wait, see what the evidence is, and don't be afraid to swap your lies when necessary and change your story. And that's how he has learned to get away with murder. Let's go back to Susan Berman. What was Susan's life like in 1999 and 2000 during the reinvestigation? She was raised quite wealthy circumstances. She had some early success with her book Easy Street when it was optioned. And then came Paul Kaufman into her life and their Broadway production or musical or endeavor, The Dreyfus Affair. And after that, things really went downhill for Susan. You heard from Richard Markey. He was one of her close friends. He went to the movies with her. He was probably the last one, other than the defendant, to see her alive. And what did he tell you about Susan's financial condition at the time she was killed? She was sliding into debt. She was struggling to survive. You heard from David Eisenman, her hairdresser. And when you're styling someone's hair on a regular basis for significant periods of time, you get to know your customers and you talk to them when they're in the chair, right? And you develop a relationship with them. And what did he say? She was afraid she'd be homeless. That's what Susan told him. And we can talk about what these two individuals said about Susan's life. We could talk about the several other witnesses who told you very similar things about what her life was like. But a picture is worth 1,000 words. And this is what Susan's life was like shortly before she was executed in her own home. She was living without flooring on concrete slab. She was using drapes, blankets, and towels for windows. She had very sparse furniture. It was rough for her. Susan was financially desperate. And I point this out because I ask you, people are survivalists, right? That's our instinct, is survival. And when you're accustomed to a certain way of life, that's what you try to achieve for yourself, always. And so what would a desperate person do to survive? What would someone who was in Susan's financial condition do to survive? But more appropriately, the question is, what would a desperate Susan Berman do to survive? That's the real question. Linda Obst, who had these deep conversations with her, told us something about this.
Most of her charm, except for love, was in order to survive. She was always in survivalist mode.
She was always in survivalist mode. Steven Silverman told you a little bit about Susan Berman. She was extremely shrewd. I don't know how to put it any better than to say she could see all the angles to something. Susan Berman was extremely sharp, extremely cunning, extremely resourceful. And you know that from all the evidence you heard from that stand.
Was Susan a manipulative person?
Extremely.
And can you explain why you gave that answer?
If one way or another, Susan would get whatever it was she wanted. You know, if she might start out politely, but then she would really start threatening you or telling you, "I did this for you, I did that for you."
And is this
Susan, excuse me, never took no for an answer.
And is this personal experience that you had with her?
Yes.
If I would ask you, how persistent a person was Susan?
Extremely.
So, people are predictable. We discussed this yesterday. And people act in conformance with their habit and customs and their personality and how they were raised. And we ask ourselves, what would Susan do to survive? When times get tough, people do what they need to do to survive. Susan would kick into survivalist mode, and she would manipulate to survive. That's how Susan survived. Now, David Eisenman talked about, throughout the years, Susan was, at first when she came to him and he started doing her hair, she was doing pretty well financially. And then as the years passed, she was not doing so well, and she wasn't paying him for a long period of time. But Susan Berman told David Eisenman that she always had an ace in the hole. And what did he say? Susan would tell me, "Bobby will give me money. Bobby always takes care of me." That's what Susan would tell Bobby throughout the time he was cutting her hair, that her good friend Bobby would provide her money. He was the one taking care of her. He was her ace in the hole. But then he spoke with Susan about 5 weeks before her murder, when her last appointment was. And actually, I think about it, when you look at the day planner, she has an appointment with him on December 28th. And you back up 5 weeks, that's about right, because she cut her hair every 5 weeks. And what did he say about this, what they discussed, this last appointment, 5 weeks before her murder?
He was expecting a check from him, and it wasn't showing up.
So Susan was expecting a check from Bobby, her ace in the hole, and it wasn't showing up.
But she became more and more distressed.
Did you remember her telling you that the money wasn't coming fast enough from Bobby?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that was in this last discussion you had with her.
Yes.
And when she was saying that, the money's not coming fast enough from Bobby, what was her demeanor like? Was it normal? Was it different?
The laughs were gone. I mean, I could tell she was under a lot of stress, and she was very upset, and she didn't know where she was going to get her rent money, and things like that.
So there was a change in Susan. Her ace in the hole, the person who always would give her money. We now know throughout the years why he's given her so much money. He's not generous with anyone else. Needs to keep her close, needs to keep her quiet. This check's not coming quick enough, and she's desperate. And the laughs are gone, and she's anxious, and she's nervous, and she's upset with her friend Bobby. And that's where she was mentally 5 weeks before she was killed. Robin Morse was one of her all-time closest friends. She spoke with Susan Berman within a month of her murder. In December of 2000, she said she spoke with Susan Berman, the very month she was executed in her own home. And that was the last time they ever spoke. Susan spoke to Robin Morse about a very wealthy friend who lived in New York, whose wife had disappeared. Well, we know who she's talking about. Here's what she said.
I remember the night that I last talked to her, that she was very nervous, and she said that someone was coming to see her, that she was going to talk to about this case, and she said she was going to blow it wide open. It's as if she had information.
Now, I'm going to back up a second. Did Susan make clear to you how she felt about this friend?
She sounded like she was pissed. She was angry.
She's angry at him. The money's not coming fast enough. Did Susan give Robin Morse any insight as to why she was frustrated and angry with her friend Bobby?
She said that she would hope or thought there would be more support or more money forthcoming, and it had dried up, or it hadn't been happening, and she anticipated that it would have been, so she was frustrated and angry.
The money was drying up. The money wasn't coming fast enough. Remember, she didn't cash that check when you looked at the back of the check until November 21st. Like 2 or 3 weeks after it was written on the 9th. We're going to look at that in a second. But whether the check was written or not on November 9th, it didn't come till close to the 21st. And how do we know that? As financially desperate as Susan was, she would have cashed it like right when it came. And that wasn't cashed till November 21st. And so the money wasn't coming quick enough. Her ace in the hole wasn't providing. He'd paid her to stay quiet, and she'd stayed quiet for so long. But now she's getting frustrated. She's getting angry. She's getting desperate. People are predictable, and Susan did what Susan needed to do to survive. She worked him for money. She worked him for money. She does it softly and gently, or in her own way, however she does it. You heard from Steven Silverman, she would say, remember I did this, remember I did that, remember I did this. What would she have done with Bobby? Well, we know, let's look at a timeline of how this happened. We know that the defendant admits knowing about this reinvestigation as of October 31st. That's when he knows about this reinvestigation. We know that less than a week later, Susan is sending him a letter. That's the letter we read in court, where she's kind of soft peddling him for money. She's not directly asking him for money, but she's letting him know how financially difficult things are in her life right now. And so he learns that this reinvestigation is out there, and then he gets this letter from Susan Berman saying how desperate she is. And the next day on the 6th, he meets with Joel Cohen, and I think he also meets with Joel Cohen on the 7th. Is that right, Mr. Lee? 6th and 7th? Yes. And who's Joel Cohen? It's his criminal lawyer in New York. And Joel Cohen tells him, they're going to indict you. They can indict a ham sandwich. I need your passport. You got to surrender your passport to me. So he gets this letter from Susan. And the next day, his own lawyers tell him, you're going to get indicted. Give me your passport. He's starting to get worried. The next day, Susan calls Bobby. How do we know that? You have the records. This is Susan's phone records. And on November 7th, she speaks to him for 16 minutes. She speaks to him for 16 minutes. She's writing him a letter, letting him know how desperate she is. He knows there's a reinvestigation. He's being told by his criminal lawyer he's about to be indicted. Now Susan Berman's calling him on the phone. And 2 days later, he writes her a check for $25,000. Why is he so freely sending her money whenever she asks for it? It's not cashed till the 21st, so she still doesn't know that check is written. But 2 days later, the reinvestigation now goes public. It's put out in the Daily News or the Post. I forget which one that was, but that's when it goes public. And so now, even though he knew about the reinvestigation, now it's real for him. Now it's put out there publicly. They're going to indict me. The whole world knows about this. This is real. This is not just my lawyer telling me this. This is not just Morty Max telling my sister who calls me, who tells me about it. This is on the front page or wherever it was in that newspaper. This is becoming real. And Susan's sending me letters and she's calling me. My lawyer's taking my passport. And now it's real. And 2 days later, Susan calls him 3 times. They speak for 4 minutes. They speak for 6 minutes. They speak for 2 minutes. And that's 2 days after this reinvestigation goes public. We know he's panicked about being arrested for killing Kathy. We know he's afraid of big bad Janine Pirro from New York, who thinks he's going to indict him. We know now that he knows or believes that Susan's been telling everyone who will listen that he killed Kathy. We know he's in communication with Susan Berman at this time, and we know he's writing her large sums of money during this period, 2 checks for $25,000 according to him. And that's on the 13th she speaks to him. The next day after he speaks to her on the phone, he stops using his cell phone. You have the records. You have the search warrant. They asked for all records of all calls from Susan Berman's phone through the end of December, through December 31st. And the last calls made on the 14th. No other calls after that date. He stops using his phone the day after Susan Berman calls him 3 times, and he's gone, and 2 days later he's in Galveston. He's living as a mute woman in a $300 a month apartment. This was all before Susan ever received that check, almost a week later. When she's telling people the money's not coming fast enough, when she's angry at him that the money's dried up, when she's telling people she's going to blow the case wide open, he's gone, he's hiding in Galveston. She still hasn't been found. Let's hope she's found. And about the Amber Alert. Is it called an Amber Alert? A Silver Alert?
Silver.
Silver Alert.
Looking for an old guy.
That's a yeah. So, why is he giving her so much money? What was Susan's leverage? What was Susan's leverage? If this trial were a trial for the killing of Kathleen Durst, and you wanted to know what was his role in killing his wife, if you wanted to know who made that phone call, who's the one person you'd want sitting in this chair answering questions? Who's the one person in the world the jury would want sitting right here to figure out who made that call, who did he admit killing his wife to, who was close to him, what did he do? Who would we want sitting in this chair? Susan Berman and the defendant, both of them, were smart enough to know the answer to that question. Susan used that information to get money. The defendant used that information to execute her. It was her or me. I had no choice. It had to be Susan. She was going to go. I am not responsible or accountable for any of my actions. And if it's the life of my close friend or my freedom for what I did to my missing wife, every day of the week it's going to be my close friend. It's going to be Morris Black. It's going to be Gilberta Najami. It'll be any witness that stands between me and the truth. Detective Becerra knew the answer to the question I posed to of who you would want on that stand. Everyone he talked to said, if there's anyone you want to talk to who's close to Bobby, it's going to be Susan Berman. And he wanted to interview Susan Berman, but he was unable to because she was killed before he even reached out to her. Never even reached out to her. And even though he didn't reach out to her, Susan says that she was reached out to. She uses some blackmail. She uses her cunning ways. She uses her sharpness. She's sending letters to him. And now she's giving him other tidbits of information, trying to get money from him. What does she tell him?
But you heard from her that she had been contacted by the police?
Yeah.
What did she say, if you remember?
He said, the Los Angeles police contacted me. They want to talk to me about Susie Berman. I think I and you are going to be best off if I just talk to them.
She said they want to talk to me about Susie Berman.
I'm sorry. Susie Berman said the police have contacted, the Los Angeles police have contacted me. They want to talk to me about her Kathy Durst's disappearance. And this was probably before the PR guy told me that the newspapers are doing these articles.
That was in 2010. He confirmed that Susan told him this in March of 2015 to John Lewin.
And if I asked you on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being I'm not sure she said it and 100 being I'm positive, you would say
7
that Susan told you that?
Yes.
100, right?
Susan definitely told me that she'd been contacted by
Susan definitely told me she'd been contacted. His words, his mindset, his beliefs. Did he think she was actually going to speak with the police? Did he think she was actually going to speak to the police?
She said, Bobby, it's going to be best for both of us if I just talk to them. I said, all right, what am I going to say? No.
Was there any...
What am I going to say? No? Talk to him. That was the moment Susan Berman sealed her fate. That was the moment that the defendant decided it was her or me. I have no choice. Susan Berman's got to go. She's going to get wiped off the face of the earth. This was his friend. We spoke yesterday about her personality and the things she did to help him get away with this killing. We don't know if she knew it was a murder, a killing, an accident. We don't know what she told him. But no matter what she did, no one deserves to be executed. No matter what their personality, what their station in life, who they are, where they live, what race they are, what nationality they are, whether they come from upper class, middle class, lower class. No one deserves what Susan Berman got. And that moment when she told the defendant, what am I going to do? I'm going to just talk to them. Okay, go ahead and talk to them. That was the moment she sealed his fate. The defendant unknowingly revealed a key truth during his testimony when he was discussing why he didn't say anything to Susan about her telling people that she called the dean of the medical school pretending to be Kathy. Here's what he said. It would accomplish nothing for me to tell her to stop making up stories. At the end of the day, the defendant believed Susan was going to do what Susan was going to do, so Susan's got to go. It was her or me. I had no choice. It was going to be her. It was her. And so he pulls out his book, and he can add another checklist to number 4, eliminate witnesses. Because that's what he does. Was it reasonable for the defendant to fear that Susan would talk?
I mean, have you ever said that anyone who knew Susan would not, of their own volition, unless it were absolutely necessary, leave her with an important secret that could never be disclosed?
That would not be wise, yes.
Susan was not great at keeping secrets. And the defendant knew that. What did he say about that testimony you just heard from Stephen Silverman?
Your witness, Steve Silverman, said that Susan Berman is the last person you would confess a murder to. I agree with that.
He agrees with that, and that's why she got killed. That's why she got killed. So who killed Susan Berman? What does the physical evidence demonstrate? The defense, in their opening statement and through their questioning of the detectives, were very clear that the evidence would demonstrate there's no physical evidence in that house that their client was ever there. No DNA, no fingerprints, no hair fibers, nothing. What does that prove? Because by his own admissions, he was in that house. It proves nothing. You heard from more than one detective that it's not like CSI you see on the TV shows where you have some really good-looking, crime scene analysts that come in and they lift some weights before they hand and they flex their muscles and they come in and within 10 minutes they've got DNA. It doesn't work like that. Many times when someone's in a known location, you don't get physical proof that they were there, and that's what we have here. He admitted he was there. What does it matter that there's no physical evidence that he was in there in terms of DNA, hair fiber, etc.? It's a red herring. But can we learn something from the physical evidence? Absolutely. The physical evidence proves a great deal to you people, to you jurors. There was no evidence of ransacking. There was no signs of a struggle. Nothing was taken from the home. The computer was there. Items of value were there. Her purse was left on the kitchen counter with credit cards, cash inside, ID inside. This wasn't a burglary. This wasn't a robbery. What the proof is beyond any reasonable doubt is that whoever entered this home intended to kill Susan Berman. This was planned. This was premeditated. Whoever entered that home wasn't going there to take something. They were there to execute her. Would Susan have let a stranger into her home? I'm going to save you a bunch of clips because there were many of them. I'm just going to summarize them. But everyone told you the same thing. Richard Markey told you when he went there, he had to call ahead. When he arrived, he had to verbally identify himself. Susan would visually confirm through the side window it was him before she let him in. She was paranoid with her security. Al Clethen talked to you like it was about like getting into Fort Knox, getting into her house. He had to call ahead. The dogs would bark. When he arrived, he had to verbally identify himself. Steve Silverman told you there's no way Susan would let a stranger enter her home. Let's talk about the dogs. These dogs that go crazy when there's a stranger there and like attack each other viciously. Did a stranger slip into this home and sneak up behind Susan unknowingly? Absolutely not with those dogs in the house. No way, impossible. No forced entry. No signs of forced entry. Windows locked, screens are in place. What does the evidence from the crime scene prove? Susan knew her killer and let him into the house. The defense may get up here and tell you, well, Susie Harmon could climb her way through the window. She was able to push that window open and get in. That's not the point. The point is when the detectives arrived, these screens were in place. These windows were locked. We're not saying you can't force your way into this home. We're saying no one forced their way into their home because the screens were in place, the windows were locked. Unless you think that maybe the perpetrator went in, executed Susan, and then thought, oh, I better put the screens back. I don't want someone else to sneak in this house. Use your common sense. That's what you bring to our system of justice. Whoever killed Susan, Susan knew her killer and led him to the house. What else do we know from the physical evidence? We know that she was shot one time single shell case recovered, 9mm. We know from Dr. Fajardo that at the time the gun was fired, it was within an inch of the back of her head, a straight shot from behind. We know from Dr. Fajardo that Susan was shot from behind. There was no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle, no evidence whatsoever that Susan knew she was about to be executed. This was an execution. Susan trusted the killer and turned her back to him. The killer hid his true intentions and waited for the opportune moment to strike. That's lying in wait. It can happen in seconds. It can happen in minutes. But you wait and you watch for your opportune moment to strike. And he waited and he watched, and he was allowed entry into her home, and she trusted him, so she turned her back on him, and in exchange she got a bullet to the back of the head, executed on her own bedroom floor in her own home. We also know more from the physical evidence. We know that the killer wanted Susan's body to be found. This letter, this note, this envelope, this is physical evidence. It's the defendant's writing. It was clearly sent by the killer as Susan's body had not yet been discovered.
You're writing a note to the police that only the killer could have written.
I cannot emphasize this enough. You can ignore everything else in this case, and if we spent one day trying this case to you, here's what you would have. You'd have a note sent by the killer that only the killer could have written, that the defendant has admitted only the killer wrote, and the defendant has stipulated, I wrote the cadaver note and envelope, that only the killer could have written. That alone is proof beyond a reasonable doubt without anything more. You have lots more. You know why this happened. What do we know from the physical evidence in the crime scene? We know that Susan's killer had a motive to kill her. We know he had a plan to kill her. We knew that Susan knew him well enough to be let into her home. We knew he was trusted enough by Susan that she turned her back to him. We know that he waited and watched for the opportune time to strike. We know he had mixed feelings about what he had done, and he wanted her body to be found. So he sent the police a note. Who fits the answer to all of these questions? We all know whose picture is going to appear when I click this button, right? Because there's no reasonable doubt of any other picture that is going to appear other than Robert Durst. That is proof beyond a reasonable doubt from the physical evidence. Defendant almost got away with Susan's murder. Almost. Almost. Because like with Detective Becerra, Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling foiled his plans to run from the truth and escape justice. Opening statements are not evidence. Keep that in mind. The defense told you in their opening statements that this was a Hollywood hoax, that the jinx was heavily edited, that it was a sham, that it was unfair. Those statements are not evidence. At the time those opening statements were made, it was already stipulated that you were going to be seeing the raw, unedited footage. You didn't see 1 ounce in this trial of any portion of the jinx. Not one single frame from the jinx. What you saw was the stipulated, raw, unedited footage of that man's statements. That man's statements unaltered, that man's statements unmodified, that man's statements coming from his own mouth by his own stipulation. The opening statements are not evidence. What is evidence is what was presented to you, and what was presented to you was a stipulation that Andrew Drecke and Mark Smerling filmed him, and that was presented to you in its unaltered format. Andrew Drecke and Mark Smerling doing their jobs as documentarians discovered evidence that had previously not been known publicly, and they made it public. They made it public, and just like everyone's done for a search for the truth in this case, they did a search for their truth. And they found evidence. And they turned it over, and they made it public. And when the defendant saw that, when he watched the jinx, when he sat down for those interviews, actually when he sat down for the interview in 2012 and he was confronted by Andrew Drecke with that Sarab letter that had been turned over, he realized, oh boy, the gig is up. On February 8th, 2015, the first episode of the 6-part documentary, The Jinx, premiered. The episodes aired every Sunday night. The conclusion was on March 15th, 2015. On March 8th, the 5th episode of The Jinx aired. And for the first time, it was revealed that Sarah, Susan Berman's, I'm calling him son, not biological son, but son, he had provided these filmmakers with the Sarab letter and envelope. And for the first time, now for the first time, the defendant learns, oh boy, they now have proof of how I write Beverly. No one had seen that before. Law enforcement had the cadaver note and envelope, but we'd never seen him writing something in the natural course of his writings before. The same exact address. And for the first time, it became known to him, oh boy, I got a big problem on my hands. And he sat down with them, and he did the interview, and then he watched the 5th episode, and he realized, I got a problem. But more importantly, he knew what was coming in the 6th episode. He knew what the police were about to see in the 6th episode when it aired the following week, because he knew he'd already sat down for that interview and was confronted and looked at them stone-faced and lied to them. He knew what was coming. And so he ran. He ran. He fled his Robin Hood apartment in Houston, and he ran to New Orleans. And he was detained in the lobby because the LAPD got an arrest warrant for him. They were tracking him by his phones. He slipped up. He used his phone to call his voicemail, and they realized, aha, he's at the JW Marriott. Let's go get him. And they got him, and he had a fake ID in the name of Everett Ward. They searched his room. They got the fake ID. They got the $44,000 in cash. They had yet to get the $100,000 that his buddy had mailed him that was on the way, Susie Giordano, but they eventually intercepted that, fortunately. They got the mask. They got the loaded gun. He ran. He ran. This is a jury instruction you have. It's 372. If the defendant flees immediately after crimes were committed or after he's accused of committing crimes on the jinx that he just watched, that conduct may show that he was aware of his guilt of these crimes. Why does he run? Because he knows he's guilty, and he's got to run because he cannot face the truth. He is not accountable for his actions. He is not responsible for his actions. He's going to run. What do we know from the defendant's own admissions in this case? You heard them. We've talked about adoptive admissions. I'm not going to go over the legal definition of them with you, but you all know what they are. Someone accuses you of something, you know it's not true. As a reasonable person, what are you going to do? You're going to deny it. And if you don't, it's because you can't deny it. He watches a movie which depicts him as the being responsible for the murder of his best friend, his wife, his other friend Morris Black, and his dog. And what's his response?
That day we talked a bunch and then arranged for you to see the movie for the first time.
That was the clincher. Then I knew I wanted to do this with you.
And how did you feel when you sat down to see the movie? Did you have trepidation about it? And how did you feel when you were watching it?
Oh, enormous trepidation. I felt the movie was very, very, very close in much of the ways about what pretty much happened.
You killed 3 people. It's depicted on the big screen for the world to see. And that was pretty close to the way things happened. And that was the clincher. That's when you wanted to sit down and do the interviews. That's not even an adoptive admission. That's an actual admission. Yeah, that movie, what's depicted, I admit that. That was close to how it happened. Just like it was an admission that he dragged his wife out of the hair when he said, that was close. Now, some people might say, well, wait a second, Mr. Balian. He's not the type of person, due to his personality, who's just going to deny things. He just says things. He's not really capable of denying things. Is he capable of denying things that are not true? Well, he also told privately his friends he liked the movie. I forgot about that slide. But is he capable of denying things?
And this made me feel bad about the movie, Andrew. I mean, the idea that I could kill Igor, I don't like.
The thought I can kill my dog, I don't like. The thought I can kill my wife, I'm okay with that. The thought I can kill my best friend, Susan Berman, yeah, I can live with that. The thought I could be responsible for the death of Morris Black by murdering him, chopping him up, and throwing him in Galveston Bay, I'm cool with that. But do not accuse me of killing my dog. Was he just saying this to Mark and Andrew because Mark and Andrew gave him secret hints to say that? I'm sorry, wasn't Mark Smerling wasn't involved in that? Andrew Drecke? Was Andrew Drecke giving him secret hints to say that about Igor?
Did he ever say the movie was inaccurate at all?
Yes.
What did he say was inaccurate?
He was upset the way they depicted the treatment of the dog.
Isn't it true, ma'am? Bob Durst was not upset that the movie suggested he murdered 3 people, but he was angry that the movie depicted that he had killed his dog Igor, correct?
Yes.
Why wasn't he upset that he was accused of killing Igor? Because he did not kill Igor. That's why he was upset about that. Because he did not kill Igor. What does the defendant admit to himself privately? So now we've talked about what he's admitting publicly to Andrew Drecke, to Emily Altman. But what does he admit privately? When we're alone with ourselves and we're alone with our thoughts, we're often the most honest. So what does he admit when he's alone with himself, when he's private? Well, we know he's admitted many times how he frequently talks to himself. You saw him talking to himself. I'm not going to show you any more clips. And we know he sat down for this interview and he was confronted with this damning evidence of his guilt. He was shown the cadaver note. He was shown the Sarab letter. They were put side by side and he was asked, which one did you write? And he couldn't tell the difference between them himself. And immediately afterwards, after he's presented with this damning evidence, he goes into the bathroom. And what's the first thing he says to himself?
Some places my bed. I am going to go use the restroom, which is right here. Except that it's locked. Unless me. Oh, someone's in the bathroom.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe this is the bathroom.
Yeah, that's...
You're right. This is the bathroom. There it is. Recorded.
To himself, after being confronted with this damning evidence, before the bathroom door even shuts, there it is. You're caught. What else does he say? Killed them all, of course. And why does he say that? Because you've seen the evidence. It's overwhelming. He did kill them all, of course. And how does he explain that? That tape is reality. Those are facts. What you heard from the stand was fiction. Wild, fantastical imaginations. How does he explain? Killed them all, of course. Oh, well, I said, they're gonna think you killed them all, of course, but that part, you just can't hear. You got it on the volume. It wasn't loud enough. I've cranked it up as loud as I can on my computer, and I'm going to play it for you, and I've stretched it out to like several seconds before that statement. You listen to it with your own ears. I apologize. Yeah.
Kill them all, of course.
You'll have this if you'd like to listen to it again in your deliberations. You can listen to it over and over, and you will not hear anything before "killed them all, of course," because he didn't say anything before "killed them all, of course." It's patently absurd, the excuse he's given. It's the fiction of and unable to face the reality of the audio. What does he do? Just like Mr. Millius had to draw those drawings from whole cloth to support a backstory that didn't exist, he needs to create words that don't exist. They're gonna think I killed them all, of course, but they don't exist. And when he faces reality, that pyramid comes crashing down because it rests on one point, the testimony of one man who, I want to be clear, I'm not saying he's a pathological liar. He lies when it's in his self-interest to do so. He lies for self-preservation. And when I showed you that bowl of cockroaches, it's not to say he's a pathological liar. It's that when it comes to his self-preservation, you cannot believe a word he says because he has the motivation to lie, as Mr. Millius explained. What he says, his lies are inconsistent with the other evidence. His lies don't make common sense. What else does he say in the bathroom?
We're going to do something new. Nothing new.
You're right about that. What a disaster it was for you. Andrew Drecke was right. You did write that cadaver note. Yeah, when you get nervous, you burp a lot.
Listen. I'm having difficulty with the question.
I bet you were having difficulty when faced with the truth. What the hell did I do? Let's think about it. Is he saying, what the hell did I do in killing my wife? Is he worried, what the hell did I do in executing my best friend? Is he worried, what the hell did I do in killing and chopping up my neighbor? Or is he saying, what the hell did I do agreeing to do this interview where the truth was exposed and made public once and for all? What the hell did I do? You let the truth surface, you let the body be washed ashore, and now everyone can see it. You have admissions in 2015 to Mr. Lewin. You've heard them all, so I'm not going to go through them all again. There's many admissions in there. There's the direct admission when he offers to plead guilty in a way that he could only plead guilty if he knows the truth of what happened to Susan and what happened to Kathy. Why else is he offering to plead guilty if he doesn't have those facts in his head? That is an admission of guilt. Mr. Lewin directly asks him, have I lied to you about anything I've said here today? Mr. Lewin, before that question, had said, Mr. Durst, I believe you killed your wife. Mr. Durst, I believe you killed and chopped up your best friend. Mr. Durst, I believe you executed Susan Berman. Mr. Lewin said all those things to him, and then subsequently asked him, have I lied to you today, Mr. Durst? No, you have not lied to me. I have not caught you in any lies. That's an admission. That's an admission. There are many more. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm on limited time, but you can if you want, but there are many omissions. In 2015, he admitted his guilt on many occasions in multiple different ways. To sum up this case of what we have presented, beyond any reasonable doubt, who had a motive to kill her? Who had the opportunity and plan to kill her? Who does the crime scene evidence point to? Who believes Susan was about to rat him out to the police? Who kills witnesses when necessary? Who traveled to Los Angeles, staying in Beverly Hills at the time Susan was killed, and later lied about it? Who fled California immediately after she was killed on a red-eye flight with a ticket purchased at the counter? Who wrote a note that only the killer could have written? Who fled when the incriminating evidence came out publicly? Money, disguise, map, and gun in hand. Who admitted he killed Susan multiple times in multiple ways? One man alone, proof beyond any reasonable doubt. This man, reasonableness is what you bring to our system of justice. Common sense is what you bring to our system of justice. We implore you to use it in this case. This is what the people have presented on one side of the card. Facts. Facts supported by each other. Facts corroborated by each other. Facts beyond any reasonable dispute. And on the other side of that card, how does he now explain this overwhelming evidence against himself? In the beginning, there was just a cadaver note. There was no eyewitnesses. There was no one testifying he was in Los Angeles. There was no physical evidence putting him in Los Angeles in the beginning. There was just a note sent by the killer, and no one really knew or could prove actually who sent that note. In the beginning, all he had to do was distance himself from that cadaver note. But he felt confident he could do that. He felt he didn't have to worry about it. He felt he could deny he wrote it. Why is that? Why did he feel so confident he could deny he wrote the cadaver note?
Hey, my lawyer said writing exemplars are like witch doctors. Nobody pays any attention to them. They still do them. And whatever they say, we will get 18 writing exemplars to say you didn't say it, write it, but that would only be if you were charged in California to begin with.
In his mind, he believed, I can get away with this. Writing experts are like witch doctors. I can just say I didn't write it, and no one can prove otherwise. And that's what he did. He gave a sample of his handwriting when ordered to do so by the court in Galveston, and he tried it. He wrote his S's backwards. He wrote his Y's backward. He changed how he writes his L's. He tried to say he didn't write it, and he felt confident he could get away with it. He felt confident enough that he could fake his writing. In 2010, he denied he wrote the cadaver note. In 2012, he denied he wrote the cadaver note. He was confronted by it in 2015, and he again denied he wrote the cadaver note. Mr. Lewin took it a step further. Whoops.
The issue is going to be, there's kind of two choices that you have, two ways you could go. You could say, listen, I went down there And you would have to explain why you went down there.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that on the people's comments and the stuff like that.
What do you mean
Somebody
people's
could
comments?
have gone into the house and saw that Susan was lying there.
Right. And you agree that that did not happen. You did not drive down there and find Susan's body, even though you were not the
I'm
killer.
not going to agree to anything like
Okay.
that. I mean,
Okay.
that's evidentiary.
Okay, so you don't want to answer that. No. What I'm telling you is, I'm just saying, that did not happen. You agree, you did not just find Susan's body and somebody else killed her.
I did not find Susan's body.
I did not find Susan's body. In 2010, I didn't write it. In 2012, I didn't write it. In 2015, I didn't write it, and I didn't find her body. And I'm sticking by this because I know that handwriting experts are like witch doctors, and no one can prove otherwise. But then new evidence surfaced. Well, in 2014 and 2015, the handwriting experts, these witch doctors, I guess, as he thought they were, they started coming in with their reports. And one after one, he wrote it. He wrote it. He wrote it. And the bags are starting to come to the surface. The truth is starting to rise up, and he's thinking, I might have a problem, but I think I'm okay. I know we can beat these handwriting experts. Maybe these bags will just wash out to sea. Maybe they'll sink again. I may not have to worry about it. But then, Emily Altman happened. Emily Altman happened. And Emily Altman took the stand. And you heard her testimony. She actually didn't realize that we didn't know he was in Los Angeles when she was asked that question on cross subsequently. But what did she say? He was in Los Angeles, staying at the Beverly Hilton at the time of Susan Berman's murder. Emily Altman let the truth slip. She panicked, her husband panicked, they tried to take it back, they concocted a crazy story that actually Bob didn't tell her. Stewart told her. Whatever it is, Emily Altman let the truth slip, and now the bags have washed ashore. The truth is out there, it's visible for everyone to see, and he realizes, I've got a problem. I no longer can deny I wrote it. I've waited, I've watched, I've seen the evidence. I'm going to pull out my handy book. I'm going to go through it and go to number 5 and say, well, time to change your lies when necessary. And that's what he does to you. He comes in here and he says, since it's clear it's my handwriting, since it's obvious Emily says I was in Los Angeles, I'll say I found her body and wrote the cadaver note. And that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. And I'm going to start to do, as Mr. Millius says, I'm going to start to fill in the backstory. I'm going to start to provide the details, and let's see if this works. This is what he told the Galveston jury under oath. I don't have a version of the story, and I have not told any lies while I have been in this room. He swore an oath, and he told that jury, he looked him in the eyes, and he said, I have not told any lies while I've been in this room. That was false. He perjured himself. He's admitted now that he perjured himself. But he wants you to believe I would only lie to one jury. We want you to believe he would lie to any jury that he needed to for self-preservation. You decide which side of this table is right. We are confident with your common sense, with your life experience, with your intelligence, that you will be able to make that decision. And here's where his tale begins. I traveled to Northern California on the 19th to take care of Diane Boucher. She was having female surgery on December 20th. Even though the next day she's apparently walking miles to restaurants, even though she's deceased and can no longer testify, even though there's no hospital records to back up his story, even though there's no eyewitnesses from up there to back up his story, even though his story makes no sense, he comes up with this, even though we know, based on everything we've heard about him, that he's the last person you would choose if you have female surgery and you want someone to be your caregiver. Robert Durst is probably the last person in the world you want sitting by your bed. But he has to come up with this story because he has to explain why he didn't just fly straight to Los Angeles to pick up Susan Berman and start his staycation. He's got to explain why he flew to Northern California. And Diane Boucher is the excuse. What's his excuse for traveling to Los Angeles and finding the body?
What were your plans for Susan Berman and Christmas?
I was going to meet her on December 22nd, and we were going to do a staycation in Los Angeles. She wanted to do all the things that tourists do when they go to Los Angeles. We were going to go to Catalina Island. We were going to go to Disneyland. We were going to go to Century 21 City, whatever it is.
He's coming here to do a staycation in the middle of his reinvestigation. When he's so panicked, he's driving 36 hours on a bus so he doesn't have to show his ID. When he's so panicked, he's chopping up bodies. When he's so panicked, he's living as a mute woman. When he's so panicked, he's not using his credit cards or his cell phone. He's so panicked, but he's doing a staycation. He went to the travel store, he pulled out his brochure, and he said, where am I going to plan my reinvestigation staycation? Where are all the places that I wouldn't want to be spotted publicly? We'll go to Catalina. We'll go to the Chateau Marmont. These aren't high-profile places. Mr. Durst, you're subject to a nationwide manhunt reinvestigation. I'm going to Disneyland. It's ridiculous. It's patently absurd. It's a fiction, which when it faces reality is exposed. Now, at this point, he has to explain why he didn't use his cell phone when he was in California. It was silent the whole time. That's why he uses his calling card and those Garberville calls show up. Garberville. Apologize to the residents of Garberville. He has to explain why he didn't call Susan from his cell phone during his trip. He has to explain why he didn't use his cell phone to call 911 when he found Susan's body. He has to explain all these things because these calls would have shown up on his cell phone records, and he knows, just like in the BD story, this is what the DA can prove, so I've got to fashion my story around it. So what's his excuse? He follows a familiar script. I left my cell phone on the plane. Where was Susan's friends to testify about this fact? Susan and I were going to Big Sur on the 27th. We were going to meet Susan's friends at Nepenthe restaurant. Where were Susan's friends to testify to this fact if it were true? Where were the answering machine messages on Susan's phone after she was murdered? Susan, where are you? You never showed up at Nepenthe. Those records are in evidence. Those phone calls are in evidence. They're available to both sides. And don't think for a second if those calls existed, you wouldn't have heard them from the defense. On the 28th, we were going to drive to San Francisco to meet my architect. And why are we meeting the architect? Because I was building a home. And Susan Berman was going to live in the ground floor. Even though he's never said this before, even though in Galveston he testified to the opposite. He testified that the architect shunned him. And that's why he didn't go to Northern California. And he ends up going to New York and spending Christmas in Bridgehampton with his wife. Yet now, he forgets about that testimony and the details start to haunt him. And he's caught when he's faced with reality. And is he building a house to live in with Susan Berman? Again, he let the truth slip.
I'm asking you, you're not just choosing as your friend, you're basically, according to your testimony, she's going to live right in the same building right below you. You'll have Susie Berman 24/7.
I wouldn't like to live in the same building as Susan Berman.
It's many days on the stand, and he forgot that was the basis of his story of why he was meeting the architect. And then he corrects himself later and tries to back away from it, but the truth slips because it's hard to keep track of your lies when you're so narcissistic and lazy about it. And you just say things and just believe that everyone will accept them because I'm Robert Durst. No one questions me. He says it on the tape when he's talking about why he lied to the mayors. I wasn't used to people questioning my veracity, checking on my stories. I am Robert Durst. This is where the story really starts to fall apart. I started my drive to Susan's house at 11 o'clock a.m. on the 22nd. Susan and I were starting our staycation at the Chateau Marmont that evening. I had to stop in Bakersfield because I had a migraine. I took a Percocet. According to his version of events, they're staying at the Chateau Marmont on the evening of the 22nd. He calls her at 11 p.m. to tell her he's not going to make it. He forgets the testimony in the case. If Susan is starting a staycation at the Chateau Marmont on the 22nd, why is she having dinner and a movie with Richard Markey that same evening? Where's her packed bags? What is she going to do with her dogs? She loved them like her children based on everything you heard. She's not going to leave them alone in the house. That's reality, that's facts. His story falls apart when it faces reality. Why didn't he tell this story to anybody before you when he took the stand? Because it's not true. I called Susan from the motel at 11 p.m. We would be unable to use our reservation that evening at Chateau Marmont. Susan said she would do her Susie best to cancel the reservation. Mr. Lewin asked him, so that reservation was made. It would appear in your Amex records. Yes, it will appear in my Amex records. When reality is pulled out, when the Amex records are looked at, his story falls apart because there was no reservation. There's no phone calls from Susan's phone doing her Susie best canceling that reservation. There's no phone calls to Big Sur planning this trip. There's no phone calls to her friends planning this trip because it's made out of whole cloth. It's drawn from his imagination, just like Mr. Millius drew his pictures. I left Bakersfield the morning of the 23rd and arrived at Susan's home at 10 a.m. When he arrived, what did he see?
I walked over to the front door. On the piece of paper,
What did the piece of paper say? And was there a note on it?
yeah,
What did it say?
it said, Bobby, I am doing my walk. Be back in an hour. Susie.
I'm doing my walk. I'll be back in an hour. Susie. Problem? Mella, Sandra Garfield. They all said Susan didn't take walks. Susan lived on a street, a busy intersection, no sidewalks, cars flying up and down that street. Susan's not taking a walk, and if Susan is taking a walk, she's going to leave her dogs behind and not take them. It's a lie. It's a detail that he threw out there to make the story believable, which is even unnecessary to his story. But it falls apart when it faces reality. So eventually he's able to get inside by using a spare key that Susan had previously loaned him. The problem is, it's the same borrowed key story from Galveston. How did Morris Black get into the house? By a borrowed key. He follows a familiar script. Plus, he testified he unlatched and then relatched the gate. The gate was latched, the front door is closed. If that part of the story is true, then how is Marvin Karp seeing the dogs running loose before he ever even arrives at the house? It falls apart when it faces the evidence in the case. He went inside, he saw the dogs. He went to the backyard. He heard a crash in the street to the front. He unlatched and relatched the side gate. He thought someone was making a U-turn in the front street. He went back to the front door. He noticed the door was now open and the note was mysteriously gone. I guess the killer was still there. Even though, according to him, her body's cold with her icy cold breath. And who took this note? The killer? I guess the killer thought, well, there's this note saying, Bobby, I'm going for a walk. I don't want this poor Bobby to get framed for this. I better protect this poor guy Bobby and take this note. It's patently absurd. It's a detail he throws in there to make the story believable, but it doesn't make sense. He then heard noises and went outside. Then he went back in and he found Susan's dead body. I'm not going to play it, but you remember what he said. He felt her icy breath. Whatever happened, he then got to the phone on the desk and he had to call 911.
I decided the first thing I should do is call 911.
All right, so what did you do?
So I ran the few steps it takes to get to the kitchen table. And I tried the telephone, but it was dead. And
When you say it was dead, what do you mean?
there was no sound.
What kind of telephone was it?
It was a landline phone, but you had there was no cord between what you held in your hand and the charging station.
So when you tried to use the phone, it was dead. That is, the cordless phone was dead.
It was a cordless phone. That's the right word for it.
All right, so what did you do then?
I put it in the charger and tried pushing some buttons on the phone, and it stayed dead.
It stayed dead?
It stayed dead. And then I took the wire, the electric cord, and went to the charger. And was just about to plug it in when I heard voices.
He obviously immediately tried to call 911. He ran to that phone on the kitchen table, which was a wireless phone with no cord between the handset. It's a wireless phone, and it was dead. So he took the electrical cord to the charger and tried to plug it in. It's a detail. And then when he starts to see the pictures and he realizes, oh wait, there's no phone on the kitchen table, there's no desk on the kitchen table. Oh, maybe it was that phone, but that's not a wireless phone. I'll say that that's the charger it's on. But it was dead, and then he's shown a picture of the phone actually plugged into the wall when the police arrived. And he says, well, I don't know, it was just dead, even though it was working the night before when she talked to him, even though it was working afterwards when people were leaving messages on her answering machine. When reality hits his story falls apart. Oops, my battery is running low. A key point when you're doing a closing argument in an important case is to plug in your laptop. He then got in his car and drove to a payphone to call 911. He decided he didn't want to use his name or voice, so he didn't make the call. He decided to write a note and mail it to the police.
I got the idea of sending a letter to the Beverly Hills police that Susan was dead in her house.
All right, what did you do next?
Well, I'm not real sure what I did next.
Why are you not sure?
Why am I not sure? I'm not sure because I'm not sure. Somehow, I had pen and paper. Well, first, why I'm not sure is because I had had a migraine headache the night before and had taken a Percocet.
All right, so the Percocet made him forget the most crucial aspect of his story of how he wrote the note. Just like the Jack Daniels made him forget how he chopped up the body. I never told the police, this is the last part of his story. I never told the police I stumbled upon Susan's body because I decided the police would not believe me. Boy, have you never been more correct about anything else. There is no way the police are going to believe you because it's a fantasy, because it flies in the face of the overwhelming evidence that it's not true. Because it's the same exact story you used in Galveston. I had to chop up the body. The police wouldn't believe me. It worked in Galveston and you tried it again. You jurors are smart. You're intelligent. You have life experience. Please don't use your common sense. Don't fall for it. In the end, how believable is his story? Let's ask the defendant.
You've seen that, or copies of that letter in evidence here. Did you write that letter?
Yes, I did.
Did you lie about it later?
Yes.
Did you lie about it for years?
I did not get your last one.
Did you lie about it for years?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's a very difficult thing to believe. I mean, I have difficulty believing in myself that I would write the letter and have not killed Susan Berman.
He can't believe it himself. He can't believe his own story, yet he wants you to buy his story? Use your common sense, please. His story followed a familiar script. In both Morris and Susan's case, there was a gunshot wound to the head. Both of them involved a borrowed key. In both of them, he had problems calling 911 because there was a cell phone left behind. In both of them, he had problems accessing another phone to call 911. In Morris's case, it was because someone was using the payphone. In Susan's case, it's because the phone was dead. In both cases, he says the police won't believe me. So I must chop up bodies. I must write cadaver notes. In both cases, he changed his lies during the trial to fit the testimony as he knew it at the time. In both cases, the victims had damaging information against him. In both cases, they were killed in the midst of this reinvestigation when he feared this damaging information was about to be disclosed. His story is a fiction. His story flies in the face of common sense. What if we could hear from Susan Berman? What would she say about this story? He tried to silence her. He tried to silence her, but he did not succeed. You saw her day planner, and she spoke to you. She spoke to you. She told me his whole story is false. His whole story is made up. She told you on the 22nd. I'm sorry. Back up. On the 22nd, I was not going down there. He was not coming down to visit me. I had plans with Richard Markey at 4:30. I was seeing Tom, Allie, and Millie. He told you that on the 23rd, she had meetings with a doctor. She was seeing Rob Cohen. She had to see Al, and she had to pay her rent. She told you that on Christmas, I wasn't going to the Chateau Marmont. I wasn't going to Disneyland. I wasn't going to Century 21. I was going to have Christmas with Susie Harmon, just like Susie Harmon told you. She told you that on the 27th, I was not driving up to Big Sur. I was meeting with Tom Patton at 11 a.m. She told you on the 28th, I wasn't meeting with this architect in this fictitious plan to build a home for me. I had my hair appointment with David Eisenman. And as I've learned through the years from my wife, you do not mess with a hair appointment. She told you. his story is a lie, because this is the reality, and when it faced his story crashed. And what does he say? Well, she must have had a different planner. There was a Bobby staycation planner. It's another detail. He tries to worm his way out of it. But then we look and we see, well, Bobby is mentioned in this planner. I wasn't having plans with him that week. I was going to call him on New Year's Eve. On these other days, I was going to Kookaroo. Sir Lewin was right. If you look in the beginning of the planner, it actually spells out the full Kookaroo. Susan spoke to you. She spoke to you, and she told you they were all lies. He executed me. Other than Susan, is there anyone else the defendant trusted with the truth? Your Honor, I have approximately 15 minutes.
All right. So, makes sense that we should do it after the lunch break.
Is that okay? I could start it now if you like, or we could start this segment right after the lunch.
Your preference is to go 10 minutes into lunch?
If that works.
Is that your preference?
Yes.
Your Honor, we don't have whatever the jury wants.
Okay.
So we're good to start.
We'll let you ramp up after lunch, and you can have 20 minutes after lunch.
Okay.
15 minutes now, 20 after. Are you gonna have enough time? Oh. Yeah, good. Okay, it'll work out. Ladies and gentlemen, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. We'll see you at 1:30.